Welcome to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show with Olivia Vizachero. Olivia is a former attorney turned life and business coach who helps ambitious attorneys to stop overthinking, start setting boundaries, and to take bold action so they can build a practice and a life they actually love. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today we're talking about how to recognize emotional overdraft and start managing your mental balance before burnout hits. Olivia, good to see you.
Great to see you, Sean.
You mentioned, I hear the term overdraft, and of course, I'm immediately in banking mode. It's so evocative of that. I'm assuming you're using it on purpose. What does it mean for lawyers in practical terms?
Absolutely. And the banking analogy is really spot on here. So if we're thinking about our lives and our emotional experience as a bank account, we're making deposits or we make withdrawals, right? So the concept of an overdraft is where you've depleted your emotional capacity so much without putting in anything positive that you're really running at a deficit. And this is caused by the result of what we call in coaching an unmanaged mind. So you're thinking a ton of negative thoughts as you go throughout your day. We typically think about 60,000 thoughts per day. And if the bulk of those are negative because you don't know how to either recognize your thoughts or shift them, those thoughts, every single time you think one of them, create a negative emotional experience. And as they start to multiply and compound throughout the day, you really deplete yourself. So you're being weighed down with that negative emotion, and you're not doing anything to create a positive balance in that emotional account, so to speak, with your positive thinking.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, you're hinting at it, I think. But, if an attorney's listening out there, like, what are warning signs that you might be running on empty? Even though, you're showing up, you're billing the hours, but are there things to be on the lookout for?
Absolutely. So the first one is just how do you feel every day? I think people really underestimate the energetic toll that all of this negative thinking has on them. But if you're constantly waking up exhausted and going through your day feeling that same way, hey, listen, I'm not a morning person, so it's okay to be tired in the morning. But if you really feel depleted all day, that's one thing to be on the lookout for. Another big issue is how reactive are you? Like, do you have a short fuse? Do minor inconveniences or, blips really set you off course? Do you have a hard time making decisions? When I was really in emotional overdraft, it would take me so long just to type an email because I'd overthink everything. And I was just so overwhelmed and stressed that even simple things felt really hard.
Yeah, I think that, obviously the job is inherently stressful, demanding. And I could see, a lawyer thinking, well, I feel this way, but that's just because this is a hard job. But I'm wondering, how constant stress and client demands quietly drain a lawyer's emotional balance over time.
Absolutely, and they do. You just touched on something that I think is really important. People think that this is just the way that it is, and therefore they don't do anything to remedy it because it just comes with the territory of being a lawyer. And while there are certain things that come with the territory of practicing law, feeling like this isn't one of them. It doesn't have to be, but you have to learn the skills in order to get yourself out of this emotional overdraft state. So one of the things that I see that really depletes people is making themselves responsible for outcomes that aren't always within their control. So I'll ask my clients, how do you define your job? Like, what's your job description? The unofficial one off the books. And they'll say, it's my job to make my clients happy. It's my job to win. And there are things that are within your control that might make that more likely, but what the judge ultimately determines isn't in your control. What a jury decides isn't in your control. What opposing counsel offers you or agrees to isn't within your control. So when you're making yourself responsible for the ultimate outcome of a case, rather than being well prepared, doing the legal research, making an argument, doing all of those things that are within your control, you'll really have that emotional weight. and a lot of anxiety about, will this go the way that I want it to? Because your body can sense that you actually lack control. Another thing that comes up here is a total lack of boundaries. So people will think that they need to be available 24/7 and that their clients won't want to work with them if they set any of those boundaries. One of the big things that I train my clients to stop doing, they always have this belief that if I don't answer the phone as soon as someone calls, especially if it's a potential client, then they're going to go out of business. So they start operating in a way where they have to be available all day, all night. And then that again leads to the overwhelm and the stress.
Got it. I think of attorneys as being overachievers, and I'm neither of those things. But I'm thinking, attorneys, they're going to just show up and try to push through something instead of, consciously recharging. And I'm thinking there's got to be some cost to that approach in the long run. I mean, there are days, like you said, you got to just show up and make it happen. But thinking more long term, what do you see and how do you help your clients?
They do have this idea that they just need to push through, but when you're operating in that belief system, you're treating your work as a sprint, not a marathon. And a lot of that comes from academia because we go through semesters, we cram for final exams, and then you get a reprieve, and then you kind of get back at it a couple weeks later. But when you're in this career, there's no end in sight. It's not going to slow down unless you intentionally make decisions that would allow it to slow down. So rather than just existing indefinitely in that sprint state, you have to figure out what is sustainable for you that you can maintain long term. One of the ideas is that you have to be available 24/7, but even separate and apart from that, attorneys really don't give themselves permission to rest. They think, I'll rest once the work is done, once I've completed everything, but that point's never going to come. And they're really expecting themselves to operate in a way that is in complete contrast with the fact that they're a human being that requires rest. So when I started to tackle this myself, the first step for me was coming to terms with my own humanity, recognizing that if I just kept pushing through, it wasn't going to serve me. For me, I did that, and it ultimately led to burnout. And it leads to burnout because our bodies are so smart. They have like an internal built-in defense mechanism where when we, with our conscious minds, constantly push past our capacity, constantly override what our body's asking us to do, and we keep abandoning ourselves in that way, our bodies finally get to a point where they're like, enough, I've had it. I'm going to start to power down and reserve some energy, save some battery life until I feel restored enough to be able to start performing again. And people tend to ignore that, but every time I've seen it happen, ultimately it will lead to a place where your body's like, I've had it, cut it out.
Yeah, the body knows. You just mentioned, the importance of an awareness, of being depleted. But I'm curious if you have any quick, tangible, simple habits that would help a lawyer who needs to rebuild their mental reserves sort of on the day to day.
Absolutely. There's a couple different ones that I recommend. The first one, and people always like tactics and strategy. This is a little different than that. The first one is thought work, which is what we do in coaching. And thought work is the skill of being able to identify your thoughts, challenge their truth, because our thoughts aren't true. They're just our opinions, they're subjective. And then being able to replace them. So if you understand the think, feel, act cycle. You think a thought, it causes a negative emotion if it's a negative thought, and then it will create a negative action or no action. If you understand that cycle, you start to understand the importance of shifting your thinking to be more positive. So you can think a positive thought, feel a positive emotion, and take positive, productive action. And as you start to shift your thinking, that negative emotion starts to dissipate. So that's the most crucial thing that people can do. People normally don't have that skill. We're not born with it by default. We typically have to learn it from someone. I had to learn it from the coach that I worked with initially, and now I teach it to other people. So if you don't know how to do that, you've got to seek out a resource in order to learn and develop that skill. The other things that I recommend here, number one, you have to plan your schedule accurately. Overwhelm, which is a big reason people are in this emotional overdraft state. Overwhelm comes from being over capacity, and you're planning in a way that ignores the math. It's based on what you hope to get done. You pile too much onto your plate, and then you carry that weight. So if you plan less than what fits in the time you have available, that overwhelm will really start to dissipate. And then the other one that I really recommend here is, again, focusing on what's within your control. Ask yourself if whatever it is you're fretting about, is that something that's within my control or is that outside of my control? And be really honest with yourself here. If it's outside of your control, release the need to feel like you need to control it, and then focus your efforts and energy on what you actually have power over.
That makes sense. That sort of mindset. You mentioned the emotional management, right? I'm curious how that ties into performance. Like focus, patience, decision making inside a practice.
Absolutely. It directly impacts performance because our thoughts cause our feelings and our feelings drive our actions. So I'll give you an example. If you're feeling confused and you sit down to work on a brief or to write an email to opposing counsel or give your client an update and you're not sure what to say, that negative emotion will drive you to go check your inbox instead. Go grab coffee in the cafeteria at your law firm. You'll start to want to avoid those negative emotions. Or if you're feeling nervous about the argument that you're going to make, you won't want to work on the argument because of that negative emotion. If you're feeling really frustrated and angry, you'll probably be reactive and maybe short fused with clients or opposing counsel. So how you feel directly impacts how you show up. So if you want to show up better in that positive, productive, intentional way, like I mentioned before, you have to be thinking positively and actually cultivating those positive emotions. And if you're not doing those things, our brains default to the negative, and you're just going to experience more and more of that negative emotion, and it's going to make everything you do harder.
I hear you. I know over the course of your practice, obviously you've worked with a lot of clients. Can you share a story where, a client sort of learned to protect their emotional energy and that led to better results, maybe at work or even at home, right? Because that's a big part of it too.
It is. And I always tell people I coach on all things professional and personal because they impact each other. Our home life affects our work life affects our home life. So all of the skills that I talk about are directly applicable in both settings. The client that comes to mind when I think about this concept, emotional overdraft, and learning how to manage their emotional experience and then have a better both professional and personal experience as a result of that. One of my clients is an immigration attorney, and obviously within recent years, there's been a lot going on in the immigration space, and a lot of people have come to me explaining that they feel burned out, they feel really overwhelmed, stressed, very frustrated, scared for their practice and their clients. And when she came to me, she was very emotional, very reactive, and was constantly arguing with reality. This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be going down like this. I should have received a different outcome in this case. And all of that should thinking creates this extremely negative emotional experience. And through our work together, she has come to understand that circumstances are neutral, which is one of the concepts that I teach. And that means that you get to choose what you think about them. The facts that we encounter in our lives don't cause our emotional state, our emotional experience. It's our thinking that actually causes that. And when you recognize that, and then you adopt the belief that you have the power and control over changing your thoughts, you can start to shift your emotional experience. And that's exactly what she's done. And she consistently reports back to me. She's like, people ask me all the time, like, aren't you just freaking out right now? Aren't you in meltdown mode based on everything that's going on in immigration? And she's like, no, I'm good. I understand what my job is, what my job isn't. I understand what I can control, what I can't. I don't argue with reality. I just focus on what I'm able to do based on the facts as they are. And she's so much more grounded and calm rather than running around like a chicken with her head cut off and really being in a state of like outrage, frustration, things like that. It's been a game changer for her.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, I mean, you mentioned new business earlier, and, clients, potential clients, they can sense that.
1000%.
So we're just about up against our time here, but I'm curious if you can, for lawyers that are out there listening, they know, this is resonating. They know they're overdrawn, they've been overdrawn. What's, one change they could make this week to start, depositing energy back into their account? Like what's again, a practical thing someone could go away with here today?
So the tip that I recommend is to do what we call a thought download. So actually grab your legal pad, or you can do it on your phone. It doesn't really matter, but take the thoughts that you're thinking, because they're like a tangled ball of yarn and it's really hard to pull it apart and understand what's going on when they're all jumbled together. So get a piece of paper. You only have to spend 3 minutes doing this, but just write down your thoughts. What's going through your head right now? You might be thinking, I have so much work to do. I'll never get it all done. I can't believe opposing counsel filed this motion. My client is completely unreasonable. My boss is really ungrateful for all my hard work. All of these negative thoughts are what's running through your brain on a daily basis, and they cause a negative emotion. So write down the thoughts. Just start with 10. That's an easy place to start. Ask yourself for each one, what one word emotion do I feel when I think this thought? So you can start to see, oh, when I think that way, I feel this way as a result. And then you're going to ask yourself 2 questions about each thought. And this is going to help you start to shift the way that you think. The first question is, how is this thought not true? And most people, when they're new to thought work, really want to challenge me or the concept and say, no, but it is true. So I ask this question in a very specific way. I'm not asking you, is it true or not? I'm asking you to tell me, how is it not true, which assumes that it's not true. And then your brain will look for different evidence in order to poke holes in that thought, which will drop your belief in it and then drop the negative emotion you experience. And then the second question you want to ask yourself is, what could I choose to think instead? And you don't have to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. A 10% better thought can be a game changer, especially as that compounds over each of those 10 thoughts being slightly better. So you might be thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. And you'll feel really insecure about your performance, maybe that sense of imposter syndrome. Even you don't have to say, I know everything, I'm the smartest person in the world. That might feel a little unattainable right now. But you can ask yourself, what would be a slightly better thought? And you might get to, I know some things, or I know a lot. There's some stuff I don't know, and that's okay. Those are all slightly better thoughts to think. Or we'll use the boss example. My boss is such a jerk. Okay, could you think anything else? Like, is it true? No, your boss probably wouldn't agree with that statement. That's your opinion. But you might be able to think, my boss doesn't react to stress all that well. And that might shift how you feel. You might have a little compassion or empathy, or at least get to a place of acceptance and understanding. And that's a lot better than frustrated and resentful.
That's great. Yeah, I can see how that would be. That's just a great inventory, great process. Thank you, Olivia. Great to talk to you, as always.
You as well.
That's it for today's episode of the Less Stressed Lawyer Show. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start making bold moves in your life and practice, visit oliviavizachero.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who you know that might benefit from it. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.